This one is not too hard to remember, but so many people mess this up all the time, so make sure that you note that down somewhere and make some example sentences for yourself. Hey everyone, welcome to another English lesson with me, Catalin. Today we have a viewer requested video all about English commas. Firstly, how we use commas is not actually that hard to understand. We have 8 main ways that we can use commas in English. But what can be a little bit tricky is trying to remember all of our rules that we have that tell us where we put those commas in a sentence. But not to worry, we will be looking at all of those today. I will say just before we get into our lesson that it's quite important that you understand what a clause is. If you've not heard of a dependent or independent clause, you might not understand what I'm going to say in this lesson. So what I recommend to you guys is going to watch my video on clauses first, and I'll be right here waiting for you guys once you've watched that. But if you do already understand what clauses are, that is fantastic, and we can get straight on into the lesson. Our first way that we can use commas is to separate 2 independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction. Just a quick tip for you guys, we have 7 coordinating conjunctions in English, and these are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And the way that you can remember those is by using the acronym FANBOYS. So when we have 2 independent clauses joined by any of those coordinating conjunctions, then we need to use a comma in there. For example, yesterday was my birthday, so I went out to dinner. That sentence there has 2 independent clauses. Yesterday was my birthday, and I went out to dinner. And they're joined by a coordinating conjunction, so. Because of this, we know that we must need to use a comma. But where do we put it in that sentence? When a coordinating conjunction joins 2 independent clauses, always put your comma before the coordinating conjunction. Make sure that if your independent clauses aren't joined by a coordinating conjunction, do not use a comma, because this is what creates a comma splice. The horrible, dreaded, run-on sentence that teachers absolutely hate. So make sure not to do that. The next way that we can use a comma is when we begin a sentence with a dependent or introductory clause, and then finish it with an independent clause. When we do this, we always need to make sure that we put our comma after the dependent or introductory clause. Now, an introductory clause is a type of dependent clause. It always comes at the beginning of a sentence and gives us some extra background information that helps us understand the rest of the sentence, which is the independent clause. For example, the sentence, while I was sleeping, I had a funny dream. While I was sleeping is our dependent introductory clause, and I had a funny dream is our independent clause. So when we have a sentence in this structure, it beginning with a dependent clause and ending with an independent clause, we always need to make sure that we follow that dependent clause with a comma. That's our second rule. This rule also applies when our dependent or introductory part is only one word. For example, in the sentence, yes, I did finish all my work. Yes is an introductory word, so that still needs to be followed by a comma. Got it? Let's move on to way number 3. Our third way to use a comma, and definitely the easiest and most well known, is when we use it to separate elements or items when we're listing a series of things. For example, if I was telling you about some of the things that I bought when I was shopping the other day, I might say, when I was at the shops, I bought some bananas, grapes, and apples. A comma separates each of those items within that list. When we're listing, the items that we're separating as well don't just have to be single words like banana, apple, or grape. They can be clauses or phrases. For example, in the sentence, I lost my book. I looked for it everywhere. I even looked inside my drawer, inside my cupboard, and inside my bag. So our third rule is we should always use a comma after each item in a list. except for the last one, which of course has a full stop. Now our fourth way to use commas, we're halfway there, is to set off non-essential clauses. So this happens when we have a sentence and a piece of that is separated from the rest using two commas. That piece that is separated is our non-essential clause. Now a non-essential clause is a clause that doesn't really do much for the rest of the sentence. It's just a little bit of extra information. We could take that out and the whole sentence would still have sort of the same meaning. So if you wanted to add just a little bit of extra information to your sentence that wasn't entirely necessary, you can do that using commas. For example, the sentence, Amy, who just came back from holiday, called today and asked if you were home. The who just came back from holiday part is the non-essential clause, because we could take that out and the sentence would still make sense. Amy called today and asked if you were home. It's just adding a little bit of extra information. Another example is, next Tuesday, which happens to be my birthday, I have an exam. So our rule here is, when we have a non-essential clause in a sentence, we need to put a comma at the beginning and a comma at the end. Another way that we can use commas in English is when we are directly addressing a person. Now sometimes when we're writing, we might want to say the name of the person that we're writing to. And when we do this, this is called a direct address. So when we are directly addressing somebody in our writing, we need to use commas to separate that name from the rest of the sentence. For example, in the sentences, I'll see you later, John, or John, I'll see you later, or I'll see you, John, later. In each of those sentences, we used commas to separate the name John from the rest of the sentence. That is our next rule. Whenever you are directly addressing somebody, make sure that you separate the name using commas from the rest of the sentence. Let's move on to our next way that we can use commas. Our sixth way to use a comma is when we are setting off direct quotation. So when we're writing, we might want to have some dialogue between people. And when they're speaking, we might want to write down what they're saying using quotation marks. Now, commas are also very important here and something that a lot of people forget to use. So let's take a look at some example sentences. Ben said, "That's amazing," or "That's amazing, Ben said," or "That," said Ben, "is amazing." For each of those sentences that has quotations in them, we need to use commas as well. So what's the rule here? Well, when we have anything that comes before the quotation, we need to use the comma outside of the quotation marks, right at the end of the part of the sentence that comes before the quotation. And when we have a part of a sentence that comes after the quotation, the comma needs to go inside the quotation marks at the end of the part that is being said. Now that sounds like a lot of words and a little bit confusing, but it's not that difficult. If there's something before the quotation, the comma goes outside the quotation marks. If there's something on the end of the quotation, the comma goes inside the quotation marks. This one is not too hard to remember, but so many people mess this up all the time, so make sure that you note that down somewhere and make some example sentences for yourself. You can put those down in the comment box if you like, and I'll check them for you. Alrighty, now number 7, we're nearly done. Another way that we can use commas is when we're writing dates and addresses. So here are our rules for those. When we are writing dates, if we have the day, month, and year, we need to put the year inside commas. For example, on July the 20th, 1969, men first landed on the moon. That year there, 1969, is set off using commas. Now here's an annoying thing to remember. When we only have the month and the year, we don't need to use commas. It's only when we have the day, month, and year. I don't know why English is so annoying like that, but it's just one of those things that you have to remember. Now, when you're writing an address, each element of the address needs to be separated by a comma. For example, please deliver this to 12 Downing Street, London, England. Each of those little elements of that address is separated using a comma. And finally, the 8th way to use a comma is at the end of a sentence to separate a little piece of information or a question from the main part of a sentence. When we use a comma like this, it shows a little bit of a pause or a shift in emotion. For example, the sentence, "You're coming to the party, right?" I've used that comma in that sentence because we have a statement and then a question. So we need to break those two up using a comma. Another example might be, "That's my job, not yours." That comma is in that sentence because we have two contrasting pieces. So we need to show a break or a pause in the middle. Alright, and that is the end of our lesson on commas today. We did talk about a lot, so I hope that you guys have been writing down some notes so you don't forget them. If you would like to make some practice sentences just to try and use some of what you've learned today, you're more than welcome to do that down in the comment box below, and I'll give you guys some feedback. You can also ask me any questions that you have or leave video suggestions down there as well. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe before you go, and check me out on my social media. I'll see you guys later. Bye!